the far post, there's Clement, he's got it!
On March 31st, 1982, Dave Clement died at just 34 years old. The news shocked Queen's Park Rangers. It shocked former teammates, and it devastated a young family. His son Neil was only 3 years old. His brother Paul was still a child. Neither could have known that most of what they would learn about their father would come from other people, from old photographs, from former teammates, from supporters who never forgot him. Because Dave Clement was not just another footballer, he was one of QPR's most trusted men, an England international, a player who had spent more than a decade serving the club, a key figure in the greatest QPR side many supporters have ever seen. That is what makes his death so disturbing. Dave Clement was not known for controversy. He was not known for trouble. The people who played beside him remembered a reliable professional, a family man, a teammate people trusted, someone who always seemed strong. Yet behind that image, something was changing. Fears were growing. Football was changing. And the life Dave Clement had built for himself was slowly beginning to slip away. More than 40 years later, his death remains one of the saddest stories in QPR history. Not simply because he died young, but because of the questions that followed, the fears he carried, the family he left behind, and the painful reality that two young boys would spend the rest of their lives trying to understand the father they barely had the chance to know. This is the disturbing story of Dave Clement, a QPR hero, an England international, and a tragedy that still haunts football today. Subscribe, because legends like Dave Clement should never be buried in silence. Before Dave Clement became a QPR legend, he was simply a young footballer searching for an opportunity. There were no headlines, no predictions of greatness, no signs that he would one day become one of the most respected players in the club's history. Born in Battersea, Clement joined Queen's Park Rangers as a youngster and worked his way into the first team during the late 1960s. What happened next was rare. He stayed. While players arrived and left, Dave Clement remained. Season after season, year after year, managers trusted him, teammates relied on him, supporters respected him. He was not the most famous player at Loftus Road, but he became one of the most dependable. The kind of footballer every manager wants and every dressing room values. As the years passed, Clement became more than just a player. He became part of QPR's identity. Loftus Road became home, and without realizing it, he was building a legacy that would outlive his playing career. The greatest years of his football life were still ahead of him, but so was the heartbreak that nobody could see coming. The strange thing about Dave Clement is that he rarely looked like the star of the team. That role belonged to others, the flair players, the headline makers, the men supporters sang about on the walk home. But ask the people who played beside him, and a different picture begins to emerge. Because while others grabbed attention, Dave Clement quietly became one of the most important players at Queen's Park Rangers. He could defend, he could attack, he could run for 90 minutes, and perhaps most importantly, he could be trusted every single week. Opponents quickly learned a difficult lesson. Beating Clement once meant very little. You had to beat him again, and again, and again. Most never managed it. One writer famously described him as QPR's secret weapon, a fullback with the speed of a winger and the shot of a centre forward. It was not an exaggeration. Long before attacking fullbacks became fashionable, Clement was already charging down the right flank, stretching defences and turning defence into attack. Yet what truly separated him from many gifted players was consistency. There were flashier footballers, more famous footballers, even more naturally talented footballers. But every manager knew exactly what Dave Clement would deliver: commitment, discipline, reliability. That trust made him priceless. Season after season, he became one of the first names on the team sheet. Not because of reputation, because he earned it. And as the 1970s moved forward, something remarkable was happening. Without attracting the same headlines as some of his teammates, Dave Clement was becoming one of the finest fullbacks in English football. Soon, the rest of the country would begin to notice. By the mid-1970s, everything Dave Clement had worked for was finally coming together. QPR were no longer just another First Division club. They were becoming one of the most exciting teams in England. The squad was packed with talent. Stan Bowles produced moments of magic. Jerry Francis controlled games. Phil Parkes commanded the penalty area. And Dave Clement remained exactly what he had always been: reliable, trusted, essential. What made this team special was balance. Every player understood their role. Every player trusted the man beside him. Few represented that better than Dave Clement. Week after week, QPR surprised people. Then they impressed people. Then they started frightening people. A club expected to finish in mid-table was suddenly challenging England's biggest sides. The impossible was beginning to look possible. Supporters started to dream, not about survival, not about respectability, about the league title, and somehow, those dreams stayed alive deep into the season. For Clement, it was the peak of everything he had spent years building. The young player, who had quietly worked his way through the club, was now helping drive QPR through the greatest campaign in their history. Loftus Road believed. The players believed. And gradually, the rest of football started believing too. But football can be cruel. After months of chasing history, QPR fell painfully short. Liverpool finished above them. The title was gone. Yet something important had changed. Dave Clement was no longer just a respected QPR player. He had become part of one of the greatest teams the club had ever produced. And England was finally beginning to notice. For years, QPR supporters had known exactly how good Dave Clement was. Now the rest of the country was starting to realise it too. In March 1976, he received the call every English footballer dreams about: England. After years of consistency at Loftus Road, Dave Clement had reached the international stage. For many players, that moment changes everything. For Clement, it changed very little. He remained the same player he had always been: calm, professional, dependable. There were bigger names in the England squad, players from bigger clubs, players attracting more headlines. But Dave Clement belonged there. He had earned that right. Every tackle, every run, every performance had brought him to that moment. His England career would produce 5 caps. Not 50, not 100, just 5. Yet those appearances meant far more than the number itself. They were proof. Proof that one of QPR's most loyal servants had reached the highest level of the game. Proof that years of hard work had not gone unnoticed. And proof that Dave Clement was far more than a good club player. For a brief period, England saw what QPR had been seeing for years. One of the finest fullbacks in the country. Looking back, there is something bittersweet about those international appearances, because they arrived during the happiest period of his career. QPR were thriving, his reputation was growing, and the future still looked bright. Few people could have imagined how quickly things would change, or how close Dave Clement already was to the final chapter of his football life. Success in football rarely lasts forever, and neither did QPR's golden period. The team that had come so close to making history slowly began to change. Players moved on, momentum faded. The club started drifting away from the heights of 1976. For Dave Clement, the biggest change came in 1979. After more than a decade with QPR, he left Loftus Road. For many footballers, a transfer is just another step in their career. For Clement, it felt much bigger than that. QPR had been his football home, the club where he had grown up, the club where he had become an England international, the club where he had built his reputation. Now it was over. He joined Bolton Wanderers. But the move never truly felt right. Reports suggest that he and his young family struggled to settle away from London. Before long, he returned south, first with Fulham, then with Wimbledon. On paper, his career was continuing, but something had changed. For the first time in years, Dave Clement no longer had the stability that had defined so much of his football life. The familiar faces were gone, the familiar surroundings were gone, and the club that had been at the centre of his world was now behind him. At the time, few people saw it as a problem. Footballers changed clubs all the time, life moved on, but looking back, this period feels different. It feels like the moment the foundations started to shift beneath him. Because while Dave Clement was still playing football, the life he had known for so long was slowly disappearing, and much worse was still to come. By 1981, Dave Clement was trying to build a new chapter. He was now playing for Wimbledon. The headlines were smaller, the crowds were smaller, but football was still football, and Clement still believed there was more left to give. Then everything changed. During a match against Lincoln City, he suffered a serious broken leg. At first, it looked like another football injury, painful, frustrating, but temporary. The reality was far more serious. Doctors feared the injury could end his career. For most people, that might sound like a professional setback. For a footballer, it can feel much bigger. Football had shaped almost every part of Dave Clement's adult life. It gave him purpose, routine, identity. Now, for the first time, that future was in doubt. The uncertainty was brutal. Could he play again? Would clubs still want him? What would life look like if football disappeared? Those questions began to grow. And according to reports, so did his fears. Despite the injury, Clement still spoke about returning. He still hoped to play again. He still believed there might be another chapter waiting for him. But behind that hope, darker worries were beginning to take hold. The strong, dependable footballer people thought they knew was fighting a battle few could see. And unlike any opponent he had faced on a football pitch, this was a battle he could not simply outrun. The injury had broken more than a leg. It had shaken the future he had spent years building, and the consequences would soon become devastating. As the months passed, Dave Clement's situation became increasingly difficult. The broken leg was not the only thing troubling him. According to the inquest, he had become deeply worried about his future, worried about football, worried about his health, and worried about what came next. For most of his life, football had provided certainty. Now that certainty was disappearing, the future that once seemed clear had become filled with questions. The saddest part is that much of this battle happened in silence. This was an era when football rarely spoke about mental health. Players were expected to be strong, expected to cope, expected to carry on. Whatever they were feeling inside, former teammates remembered Dave Clement as dependable and professional, the type of man who rarely drew attention to himself. Yet beneath the surface, a very different battle was taking place. The inquest later heard that he had become increasingly concerned about both his football career and his belief that he was suffering from a serious illness. Those fears continued to grow, and on March 31st, 1982, Dave Clement died at just 34 years old. The news sent shockwaves through football. Former teammates struggled to believe it, supporters were devastated, and a young family was left facing a loss that would never fully disappear. The tragedy was not simply that Dave Clement died, it was that the battle he was fighting remained invisible until it was too late. After Dave Clement's death, football was left searching for answers. This was not a forgotten footballer. This was a man who had given QPR 476 appearances, scored 28 goals, earned England recognition, and helped build one of the greatest sides in the club's history. Yet those closest to him were not mourning a footballer. They were mourning a husband, a father, a friend. That was the hardest part. His sons were still children. Paul was only 10. Neil was only 3. Neil was only 3. For Neil especially, his father would become someone known through photographs, old footage, and the memories of others. Years later, Jerry Francis spoke about seeing Dave in Neil. The same strength, the same build, the same way of moving. Francis had shared dressing rooms with Dave, played beside him for QPR, played beside him for England, and like many others, he never forgot the shock of losing him. There was another sadness too. Dave Clement still believed he would play again. The broken leg had threatened his career, but he still hoped there was another chapter ahead. Instead, that chapter never came. As QPR prepared for Wembley, and the biggest occasion in the club's history, they first stopped to honour one of their own. A memorial match brought former teammates and friends together to say goodbye. For a moment, football paused, not to celebrate, but to remember Dave Clement, and the tragedy surrounding the Clement name did not end there. Reports later suggested more heartbreak touched the family. His brother Trevor was reportedly killed. Another brother, Lee, was later murdered. Different tragedies, different years, but more pain attached to the same family. Perhaps that is why Dave Clement's story still feels so powerful today. One year he was helping drive one of the most exciting teams in England. A few years later, he was fighting fears that very few people could see. The fall happened quietly, and that is what makes it so heartbreaking. Dave Clement survived the pressures of professional football. He survived the demands of representing QPR and England. What he could not survive were the fears that arrived when football started slipping away. More than 40 years later, supporters still remember the man they believed he was. Dependable, loyal, respected, and perhaps that is how Dave Clement should be remembered. Not for the way his life ended, but for the example he left behind. Subscribe because football should never forget men like Dave Clement.